Hey everyone, welcome to the Healthy Air podcast by Safe Traces. I'm Eric Malmstrom, the CEO of Safe Traces, and joining me today in Northern Virginia is Larry Sloan. Larry, welcome to Healthy Air.
Thanks for having me.
I want to provide our listeners with a brief background on Larry to provide context for our conversation. So, Larry stepped into his role of CEO at the American Industrial Hygiene Association in October 2016. Prior to this, he served as CEO for 7 years at SOCMA, a trade association representing the interests of the U.S. specialty chemical industry, where he started his nonprofit career at the Adhesive and Sealant Council, a trade association representing adhesive and sealant manufacturers. He was promoted to his first CEO role there in January 2005. He led this group for 5 years. Larry began his career as a chemical engineer at Air Products and later worked for Nalco Chemical Company in marketing, manufacturing, and sales capacities. He earned a BS degree in chemical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania and later graduated from Northwestern's Kellogg's Graduate School of Management, where he earned his MBA. So super impressive background, and we're really grateful for Larry to make time for us today. So Larry, to kick off, tell us a little bit about your career path. So you started off in industry at Air Products and Nalco, and subsequently you transitioned over to leadership roles at trade associations and now a professional association at AIHA, SOCMA, and the Adhesive and Sealant Council. So talk us through kind of how one thing led to the next.
Yeah, sure. So again, thanks for having me, Eric. So, I started out my career, I was a process engineer at Air Products, and I went through what was called a career development program. So I was rotated through several different functional areas within Air Products. But my very first job, they threw me out on the road, and I was dealing with clients literally the first weekend of my career at Air Products. And so it really got me in touch with the customer at a very early age. But ultimately at Air Products, I ended up in an environmental group. It was a water treatment technology that Air Products was selling at the time. It was adding oxygen to the wastewater treatment process. And so I was manning wastewater processes all around the country, from Central Texas, the San Antonio area, out to San Francisco, spending weeks on end, taking water samples and making sure that the technology was doing what it was supposed to do. But after, working at Air Products as an engineer and kind of an application sales engineer, that's when I went back and I got my MBA at Kellogg. And then because I really had such a passion for the chemical industry, I went right back into the industry and worked for Nalco Chemical in a variety of capacities. And I did that for a while, and I ended up in sales, and I relocated from the Chicago area, which is Nalco's headquarters, down to Northern Florida. And I was selling chemicals for a while in that territory. But, I got tired of being a road warrior. I got tired of being out on the road, selling 5 days a week, and I wasn't really enamored with the kind of sales that I was doing. And so from that role, I ended up moving into the nonprofit sector. I took a detour to the Mid-Atlantic region, which is where I'm from originally. And I worked for my father's business as a manufacturer's representative for a few years. And so that brought me back to the DC area. But despite how well I did financially and how successful I was with his company, I didn't have the passion for that business. And I knew I didn't want to inherit that family business. And so a very, very good friend of mine from college, she at the time had just gotten a leadership role at a trade association here in DC. She and I had dinner one night in 1999. And she goes, Larry, she goes, with your background in the chemical sector, you should look at a position at a chemical trade association. And one thing led to another, and I got my first role at the Adhesive and Sealant Council. And because that was a relatively small association, the head of that group told me when I was interviewing, he says, I'm going to be here for 5 years, and then I'm going to retire. And there's a possibility, if you play your cards right, that you could become the head of this group when I retire. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a fantastic opportunity. And being a small trade association, I had my hands in all sorts of functional areas. I was in charge of membership and marketing, but I helped out with government relations. I did some of the programming. I did some business development work. And so I had a really broad-based experience, if you will, in my very first nonprofit role at the Adhesive and Sealant Council. So got that job as CEO in 2005, worked there for another 5 years, total of 9 years at ASC. And then I knew the CEO of SOCMA very well through my networking. And when he decided to retire at the end of 2009, he suggested that I interview for his role. And so I interviewed at SOCMA, got that job, started there in 2010, ran that place until the end of 2016. And because of the commonality of the legal counsel between SOCMA and AIHA, we both use the same legal counsel. They suggested that I throw my name in the ring for the job here at AIHA. And so then I contacted the recruiter for the AIHA job, made it to the finalists, and I was one of two, and clearly resonated well with the search committee, and voila, here I am. So everything that I did really led to where I am today. And because of the focus that I had in each one of my jobs as an engineer, and even at Nalco when I was more on the business side of things, health and safety was a critical element of each one of my jobs. And so industrial hygiene was new to me when I joined AIHA, but I had a working knowledge of the safety space from previous roles.
Fantastic. So let's just piggyback off on that last comment. So your kind of academic background is in chemical engineering. How is that? I mean, early on, you took a pretty tried and true path going into industry, but now you're leading major associations, and now you're leading at the AIHA, an organization that is really one of the foremost leaders in terms of health and safety, in the US, and plays a big role globally. So how does that chemical engineering background inform how you're thinking about your role, your organizational leadership right now?
So when I was interviewing for the job at AIHA, one of the comments that I learned about later on was one of the folks on the search committee was talking about my qualifications after I left the room. And she made a comment like, is Larry a little bit too much like us? In other words, we're looking for an association executive. We love the fact that he has a technical background, that he has a chemical engineering experience, but is he almost too much like us? And at the end of the day, obviously, they said, no, this is a real bonus that Larry has that technical background. One of the things that suits me very well in this role as the CEO of AIHA is I have a very process mentality. Now, when I got my business degree, I learned how to think a little more holistically, but engineers are very linear in their thinking. And when I am working on any variety of projects at AIHA, a lot of what we have to start with is what's the process? How are we going to go from step A to step B and so forth? And so my engineering background and my focus on process and making sure that the steps are clear and transparent to all the different stakeholders has really benefited me in my role. And it's also given me a lot of credibility with the CIHs, because this is not an easy group of members to manage. I mean, we've got 8,500 members within the association, and we got 8,500 different opinions, as you can imagine. But I feel like even though I'm not a certified industrial hygienist, I have garnered some respect by the fact that I do have that chemical engineering background. So that's kind of earned myself a few extra stripes, if you will.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the American Industrial Hygiene Association in terms of, you kind of got into it a little bit in the membership numbers, but talk to us about the size, the committees, the scope of the activities, the thought leadership, and really what are the priorities for the organization.
So, once again, AIHA is predominantly a national professional society. Most of our members are here in the United States. We've got a contingent of members in Canada as well as around the world. But we just did a rebranding last spring. And so, we are more than just the association for the core industrial hygienists. We are now referencing ourselves as the association for scientists and professionals that are committed to preserving and ensuring what we call occupational and environmental health and safety. So you'll see reference to the acronym OEHS. And our members really cover a broad spectrum of the OEHS space, not only in the workplace, but also in the community. Think about all the different workers that we need to protect. It's not just workers that work in manufacturing, in the service sector, but it's also workers that are first responders. They're out in the field, right? And so these are community-based workers that we have to protect and take care of. But we were founded in 1939, so we're in our 80th year of 81st year now of existence. And we have a whole variety of programs and services, educational offerings, government relations support. We have specific member benefit programs. And, we have a variety of technical committees and management and business committees, 50 plus committees in total. We have a couple different special interest groups, including one for the minority segment of the profession. We manage 65 plus local chapters around the country. We have two foundations. One is an education foundation that provides scholarships to both undergraduate and graduate students. We have another foundation called the Guideline Foundation, which publishes something called Emergency Response Planning Guidelines. These are basically community-based exposure limits. They're kind of like TLVs, threshold limit values for the community. And we're the only ones that publish these ERPG values. We also have three what we call limited liability corporations. We have a lab accreditation practice, we have a proficiency analytical testing practice, and we have a series of registry programs. These three LLCs help bolster the revenues of the overall enterprise. We're not just consistent on or based on the revenues from membership and our meetings. The LLC revenues are a significant percentage of our total revenue pie. And that helps us be a little more diversified in our revenue base.
Great.
Now, one more thing I'll mention in terms of thought leadership. We developed a program 4 or 5 years ago called the Content Portfolio Advisory Group Program. And this whole program is dictated around what are the content priorities that we as an association would like to further build education and programming around? What are the cutting edge topics that the industrial hygiene OEHS profession is facing today? So through a series of environmental scans, we came up with 5 different buckets, and they include things like occupational exposure banding, okay, which is a NIOSH program. Big data and sensors. What do you do with large amounts of data? How does the industrial hygienist manage copious amounts of data? Total worker health. And how do we fit into total worker health? That's another NIOSH program. Our angle to total worker health is something called total exposure health. All the exposures that a worker is confronted with in his or her life as an employee of a company. And there's a few others as well. So we have a nice, robust process in which our many volunteer groups, they suggest ideas for projects, and we run it through this approval process to map those ideas against these content portfolio priorities.
Excellent. That's an amazing breadth of different activities, and I love the kind of innovation focus and some of the things that you listed at the end there. So you've been in your role since 2016. Over the past year, you've had the pandemic to reckon with, as we all have, both at individual level, like all of us, but also it directly intersects with AIHA's core focus around environmental health and safety, occupational health and safety. How has the pandemic, has this been kind of a continuation of many things that were already in flight and now they're just more timely and important? Or has the pandemic kind of shifted or changed or brought new things to bear within your kind of mission?
It's definitely the latter. We shut down our offices almost exactly a year ago. And we just snapped into action. We recognized that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to really flex our muscle and to really demonstrate leadership with respect to COVID. And one of the first things we started to do last spring was late winter, early spring, was to start publishing a variety of guidance documents on topics like cleaning and disinfection, proper use of PPE, when to use what, UV disinfection, engineering controls, reopening buildings that have been shuttered because of COVID, things like Legionella and mold. If you have a building that's shut down for months on end, and then you want to restart it up, you've got stagnant water systems. And so we started publishing all these guidance documents that are targeted at the downstream end user, I call it, the person that is in the field that needs to be owning or operating a building, right? Operating a business. In late April, early May, we got a challenge from none other than Mark Cuban from Shark Tank. And he connected with one of our former presidents from many years back. And to make a long story very short, Mark Cuban said, if you're all about worker health and safety, you need to be developing guidance documents because we're not getting a lot of guidance from the federal agencies. This was back in April. So that's what basically spawned the Back to Work Safely initiative. And we formed a task force within a matter of 48 hours. And we decided that we were going to create industry segment by segment a library of these Back to Work Safely documents that were aimed at providing common sense, clear guidance to smaller businesses, starting with restaurants, gyms, and hair and nail salons. They were the first 3 industry sectors that we targeted. Each one of these Back to Work Safely documents comes at it from the standpoint of what do I do as an employer when I'm opening up my business? What do I need to be doing as an employee? And if I'm a member of the general public frequenting this establishment, what do I need to be mindful of? And so we provide, an overview of what we call the hierarchy of controls. What are things that should be done from the standpoint of the hierarchy of controls pyramid? So at the top, you talk about basically eliminating the hazard. Well, the hazard is COVID. The only way to eliminate the hazard is to screen people before they come to work, right? Prevent the sick people from entering the workforce. And you go down the hierarchy of controls, you talk about engineering controls, and then you talk about administrative controls. And then, of course, at the bottom is personal protective equipment. So we garnered a lot of interest in mainstream media as a result of all of these guidance documents that we produced over a 8 to 9 month period of time. In total, we had 27 back to work safely documents and another dozen or so COVID documents. And we were able to sit for interviews with, ABC News, CNBC, NPR, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and several others. So I really consider COVID to be kind of like a black swan event that has really raised the visibility of the profession in AIHA.
Yeah, fantastic. And many of those documents that you've listed are really central. I mean, coming at this from our side at Safe Traces, a technology company, those are, widely used, respected, and so fantastic job with that. Now, one of the most recent documents that you've published and just recently done some press conferences and media around is the Joint Consensus Statement on Aerosol Transmission. Right. Please fill us in on that and the significance of that.
So this is a document that we started thinking about literally 5 or 6 months ago. It took us a while to get the document published, but the whole issue of aerosol transmission is fraught with a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of dissension even across the healthcare sector. Whether you're an epidemiologist, a healthcare worker, an industrial hygienist, an OEHS professional, these terms, whether it's a contact, a droplet, an aerosol, these terms are very confusing and they mean different things to different people. So really the point of the Joint Consensus Statement was to galvanize the support of our allied associations in the healthcare epidemiology space. And we were successful year to date of attracting sponsorships from 9 sister associations. And we continue to reach out to other medical associations to add to that list. But the purpose of the Joint Consensus Statement is to indicate that we are of the firm belief that particles of all sizes, whether they're large droplets versus the sub-micron sized particle, all these particles matter in terms of the transmission of the virus. And one cannot just draw a line in the sand and say anything below this point is really not that important, and anything that's above this point is important. You might have heard the term fomite transfer, where you have contact with surfaces that have been contaminated by a droplet. Well, our contention is that the very fine aerosol particles, those that are below, say, 10 microns or even 1 micron, they float around in the air. And depending upon the air currents in the built space and what the air ventilation system is, how many air exchanges there are per hour, that all makes a difference in terms of those particles that are floating around. So the statement is really designed to send a message to the regulatory authorities at the federal level that we feel there needs to be clear guidance from CDC and state health departments that all size particles matter, and proper PPE must be mandated for those workers that are in higher risk environments. Healthcare workers, including those that are in nursing homes and long-term care facilities, all need to have the highest level of protection. From there, as you go down to lower risk environments, sure, you could look at face masks, surgical masks, but we're really advocating for ramping up the need and the mandates for PPE, which are the N95 respirators for these higher risk workers.
So a bit of a statement of the obvious, but the information environment has been overwhelming to many, even people who kind of live in that environment and are directly impacted by COVID related health and safety kind of practice. And it's overwhelming in a few respects. One, there's a lot of information out there. Number two, it's changing. Number three, in many cases, it's conflicting. And in other cases, it's fragmented. How do you think about that? I mean, you have some of the real go-to documents out there that are kind of the Bible for many people, but there's ASHRAE, there's OSHA, there are all other independents who are publishing things. And I think for, both normal people and then those responsible for building safety decision making, it's really hard to keep track of everything. So what is your sense of that from your role and at the AIHA?
It is an absolute daunting task. I wish I had an easy answer for you. There is so much information that comes across my inbox each and every day. There are studies that are being published, peer-reviewed studies. There are articles that claim to be scientific, but they're really not. So you have to kind of like, really read through the article to find out whether this is legitimate or not. And of course, there's all this conflicting information, even at the federal level. So it is not an easy task. And our job at AIHA is to figure out ways to bring the science to life and to provide a very clear accounting of what you need to do to provide the utmost safety to your workers. So I'm very proud of the fact that as OSHA is continuing its work under the Biden administration to develop an emergency temporary standard, we were on a call with the authors of the ETS just a week or so ago with about a dozen of our subject matter experts. And it was really an off the record open forum where we were able to provide OSHA personnel with very, very clear guidance on what we feel needs to be incorporated in this emergency temporary standard. We have to continue to communicate the issues that are important to us. If we feel that particles of all sizes contribute to the transmission of COVID in the workspace, we have to figure out a way to tell our story that is going to be readily understood by the various stakeholders that need to know. And a lot of these stakeholders are extremely bright individuals. And everybody has their own little spin on the subject matter, right? Everybody's got their own little bias that they bring to the table, including the industrial hygienists. So one of our challenges is to be able to speak in terms that people who are not industrial hygienists understand. And that is actually a whole separate initiative that I didn't even talk about earlier with our public outreach campaign. Because even after COVID passes us by and we're back to whatever the normal times are, we are doing a major outreach campaign to the business suite, C-suite, and also to students of all ages, because we've got to fill the pipeline with folks that are excited about working in this profession. You've got to start really, really young with kids that are probably in junior high school and even just make them aware of the fact that occupational health and safety is a profession. So it's a really exciting time for the profession. It's fraught with challenges, but I think that's empowering our profession to go above and beyond and to, really just exert itself in ways and flex our muscles in ways that we, previously had not been able to do. And I think that's what keeps people really passionate about the work that they do day in and day out. So.
Yeah. Well, and picking up on that, so I mean, the industrial hygiene profession there's a real serious code of conduct. It's in some ways it's reminiscent of the medical profession, and the seriousness with which the profession is kind of certified and actually standards that are upheld, and just in the pandemic experience, obviously it is spotlighted how important industrial hygiene is in events like this. I mean, beyond just generally. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on the profession, and what do you think? You hit on some of this before, but what do you think is going to be the long tail of this experience for the profession?
So first of all, speaking about ethics, there is a code of conduct for serving as a member or volunteer of AIHA. So the way that our members conduct themselves, whether they're serving on a committee or posting, articles or their sentiments to our online community platform, there's a code of conduct. Then when you become a certified industrial hygienist, the Board for Global EHS Credentialing, which manages the CIH, that's a separate organization, they have their own code of conduct for CIHs. And they take this very, very seriously. And if somebody is, suspected of violating or stretching the limits of that code of conduct, there's a reporting mechanism that is built into place. Now, in terms of the profession, I think that the COVID pandemic is going to elevate and sustain a very keen awareness about the importance of occupational health and safety to business management. There is a lot that's being done in the environmental, social governance space, the ESG sustainability space. And AIHA is playing a role in all of that, but we're trying to kind of figure out how do we dial into the whole ESG sustainability space. That's a whole separate program that we're involved in. But we feel that when you start talking about development of standards that companies are going to be evaluated against, and the inclusion of leading metrics and lagging metrics, and whether institutional investors are going to preferentially invest in companies that have better standards of occupational care, we as the Association for Occupational Health and Safety, we feel that we should have a seat at that table. So I think that the pandemic is bringing to light the importance of occupational health and safety. And I think that this is going to be a manner in which we can sustain our relevancy and interest in the broader public sector long after COVID is a hopefully fine, distant memory.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You have a front row seat, and in some cases, you're driving at AIHA innovation within the field, and that innovation is taking a variety of forms. It's the standards, it's the way that you're interacting with other communities, it's through technology. I mean, there are multiple prongs of the innovation. What have you been seeing from your position, and which of the innovations do you think are most exciting, most promising, to just call out for everyone?
So I'll list just a couple examples. Number one, situational awareness. That's a very commonly used term. But when you talk about, the COVID pandemic, think about how you conduct a situational awareness of people that are in the workplace to understand how they interact with each other and identifying possible transmission paths so that workers can limit their exposure. How you test and quarantine folks through artificial intelligence and machine learning advancements. Low-powered Internet of Things sensors, having people wear sensors that are either embedded in their clothing and monitoring different characteristics to monitor one's health, wireless connectivity between these sensors, and the vast amounts of data that these sensors are collecting. All of these technologies allow for more automation, and they really help to enhance what I call the situational awareness to deal with COVID-19 in the workplace. So that's kind of area number one. Number two, and I referenced this earlier, is just smart PPE. Again, wearable sensors, communication devices, they sense contaminants in the environment. They warn employees of potential exposure to leave a particular area and follow decontamination protocols. That's another really exciting area for the profession to get involved in. And then finally, we have a very close relationship with NIOSH, and there's something called consumer aerosol monitors, CAMs. And there's some work that's being done to provide information to our community and ultimately to the public in general on the potential and limitations of these consumer aerosol monitors for different occupational applications. And there's a lot of potential on how these monitors are going to be used, how the data is going to be used, and how this would actually help inform industrial hygienists about, information in situations where, there aren't, where real-time monitors exist, and how you integrate all that data from those real-time monitors. So we're in a really exciting time where you have all of this data that's being produced through these direct read instruments. And the challenge for us as a profession is, how do you use that data and make sense of it, right? And think about the work that Safe Traces is doing. You conduct your analyses in the built space. How do we as industrial hygienists leverage the data that your company produces and then develops a series of control strategies to help protect the inhabitants of that space? So it is a really exciting time for the profession. And the more we get involved in automation, sensor technologies, and AI and machine learning, the sky's the limit as to where we're going to go as a profession.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I'll just editorialize briefly here. I mean, the technology, obviously, from our perspective, it's exciting and can really bring an enhanced capability to kind of assess and mitigate risk. But there's clearly an ongoing need and a major need for the frontline industrial hygiene community and people to really make sense of the data. Systems and sensors and all these things can take us advance things, but there's still also a major role for actual practitioners to really advise on what does the data mean, what should we do, all those types of so what type questions.
The other thing I'll add is that there's an emotional mental health aspect. One of the things that we've been really stressing with the membership of what we call soft skills. So I personally got into something called emotional intelligence about 3 years ago. And I had an executive coach at the time, and she ran me through an EI assessment. And she's like, okay, here's Larry, where you have some work to be done. And I've taken further courses and workshops over the last several years to really focus on how I relate to people, How do I seek to understand other people's perspectives? And the EI is so important in everything we do at work, at home, with our friends, with our kids, with our parents. So these softer skills are areas of expertise that we need to implant in the minds of our members so that they understand that as they're talking to people at all the different levels of an organization, they need to really be cognizant of how they're communicating, how they're listening, how they're posturing themselves with these other folks. Soft skills is a very, very key area that all of our members need to focus their attention on in some form or fashion.
Mm. Um, Totally agree. So getting into the kind of real world right now, very kind of top of mind for the country and for many parents is school reopening. It's really something that has lots of different elements and challenges to it. And the AIHA, that's one of the areas within your various documents that you've kind of focused on and provided thought leadership on. I'd be interested to hear your perspective as the country is kind of grappling right now with sending kids back to school and teachers back to school, kind of our readiness for that, what you think should be priorities as we start or kind of advance that process.
Well, I know there's been some confusion about the recent CDC guidelines on, whether or not teachers and employees of these K through 12 schools need to get vaccinated. And, from a personal perspective, I believe that anybody that works in a school is a frontline worker. And I believe that they should be moved to the front of the line with all the other frontline workers. And there should be a very strong recommendation that anyone who works in a K through 12 school should be vaccinated, quite frankly, because, a lot of the schools don't have the flexibility to make the modifications that are required of the indoor built space. A lot of the schools around the country in our big cities are older buildings. They may not have the ventilation system, the HVAC systems that can be modified to the higher rating MERV filters. Some schools, the windows can't open, so you don't get that natural ventilation. So there's only so much these buildings can do. And so we have got to provide every conceivable level of control strategy for anyone who is working in these environments. And I was disappointed to read about the CDC guidance and the confusion as to whether or not teachers, are really necessary that they get the vaccine, because I personally think that they should be. Now, as far as PPE goes, obviously we can't be equipping everybody with N95s, but, again, anybody who's spending time indoors, they need to be wearing a face mask. There's been some talk about double face masks, where you wear a cloth mask and a medical surgical mask over it. I'm not necessarily going that far, but I do believe that absolutely everybody in the K through 12 built environment should be wearing a mask of some kind. It does provide protection from both the source as well as the recipient. And that all of the buildings, the operators, the engineering teams within these schools need to consult with their industrial hygiene consultants, their professionals, to figure out what mitigations can be made to the HVAC systems, whether or not they can put portable HEPA filters in classrooms to help enhance the air quality. Can they do some natural ventilation? Of course, it's so cold out right now, but as we get into warming months of the year in the spring, what other measures can be taken to enhance the quality of the air? Because it really makes a big difference when you ramp up the air changes per hour from, say, 2 or 3 up to 5 or 6, which is where we want to see people be.
Mm. Great. So I'm going to put you on the spot right now. So we're now roughly a year into having to live with the pandemic in a really significant way. And it's taken a tremendous toll, hundreds of thousands of people within the US dead, many hospitalized and suffering ongoing health effects. And then economically, there's been significant cost. And the reopening process has gone through several fits and starts where we reopened and then we've shut down because we haven't managed it well. And now a year in, we're still kind of where much of the built environment is not fully open. And some places have been open the whole time, some have been open and closed, and now many places are planning for reopening in the coming months, whether it's schools, offices, other places that we would normally be occupying in normal life. Do you think right now that we are ready, broadly speaking, for reoccupying and learning, mistakes from the past to now go in more prepared and where this is going to be a successful experience? Or I'd appreciate your real candor on this. I know it's a difficult question and there's lots of kind of different elements to it, but from your perspective, are we learning our lessons on this and getting smarter and being ready to do this the right way?
I feel like that we're two steps forward and one step back, or sometimes two steps back and one step forward. I feel like we're on a learning curve still, and there's just so much that we don't know about. Again, indoor air quality, and how much the masks and the respirators really protect you. The vaccine, once you get the vaccine, you go through your course of treatment. Do you still need to wear the masks? Yes, absolutely. You still need to wear the masks, because I do believe that that extra level of precaution is critical. I think that we're at the point, and I might be speaking a little avant-garde here, but I think that if we had mandated face coverings and masks from day one, okay, a year ago, I personally believe that we would not have had to shut down the economy the way we did. And I think that would have saved a lot of the economic hardship and the emotional anguish that we're hearing our young kids going through right now, because they've been removed from the school environment for the better part of the year. And so I am of the belief, of the mindset that yes, it is time to be reopening the economy. It is time to be reopening our schools, but we've got to do it smartly. And when you start reading guidance where it's conflicting and they're saying that these people don't necessarily need to get the vaccine or it's totally up to them, no, I think that we need to be much more prescriptive in who gets the vaccine. Perhaps those that don't get the vaccine shouldn't be let into the schools for a period of time. PPE and other face coverings should be mandated in any built environment. It doesn't matter what industry sector you're in, whether it's K through 12 schools, retail, restaurants. The politics unfortunately got in the way over the last many months.
Mhm.
And we went down a rabbit hole that I think was shameful.
Mhm.
And so, since you've asked me the question, you're putting me on the spot, I'm very, very disappointed in the path that we took as a country. But I believe with the new administration that we're on a better path. The number of vaccinations that are being conducted per day, per week is ramping up. And I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. And just as importantly, I see that when the next pandemic comes, hopefully not a long time from now, hopefully it's a long time from now, we will be much better prepared. We'll have an inventory of PPE and incubators and respirators and all the things that we should have had stockpiled many years ago. And we'll have a much more detailed plan that we can reference,
Mhm.
because I feel like this thing hit us cold a year ago and we were just throwing up our hands and just doing everything we could to it's almost like we did everything wrong at the front end of this thing.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think we're on the right path forward.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that honesty. So switching topics, we're about 3 months out from the AIHA's annual conference, which is going to be part virtual, part in person in Dallas. Really interested to hear what that's going to look like. I mean, it couldn't be timelier and more important given what's happening right now, as we've discussed. Um, Give people kind of an overview of what to expect, and for those who are interested in getting involved, either attending, participating, speaking, supporting in some way. It'd be great to hear more on the event.
Sure, sure. So AIHC is our flagship event. It spans the course of 3 days. This year it's May 24th, 5th, and 6th. There are professional development courses that precede it and follow it, and these are full day workshops. But on the education side of things, we have a lot of content on pandemic prevention. We have a lot on total exposure health, which is, again, our contribution to total worker health, which is that NIOSH initiative, and also the workplace of the future. What does the workplace of the future look like? And the pandemic has obviously shined a light on what are the precautions that are going to be put into the workplace for many, many years to come. We're not going to go back to the office of 2019. The 20s are going to provide a completely different framework of what the office space, what the manufacturing space is going to look like. We're also going to be offering education on the more fundamental occupational environmental health safety topics, hazard recognition, exposure assessment, risk management and assessment, leadership and management, emergency preparedness. But there's going to be a heavy dose of biological hazard prevention and mitigation types of topics.
Great. Well, it looks like a fantastic event, and all good luck to your team in helping pull all of this together amidst challenging circumstances. So just kind of switching again. So you are clearly a voracious reader and consumer of information, and I'm sure things are hitting you from all different angles. It'd be great to get a sense of your kind of information diet. What are you reading? From websites to books to people, and what are you listening to? For people who are passionate and active in the space that you're in, industrial hygiene, but also, you're very, you mentioned emotional intelligence. You clearly care a lot about leadership and management as well. So it'd be great to hear kind of what are you reading and what's part of the ongoing diet.
So first off, the publications that AIHA produces, I think, are first rate. And so we have the Synergist magazine that comes out every month. There's the Synergist Weekly. There's also the Synergist Newswire, which is a compilation of occupational health and safety stories from, literally around the world. And so we get these news feeds every week. And so I scan those articles. I read the magazine. Of course, there's also the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Health. That's a much more scholarly, technical magazine that's peer reviewed. I typically don't read those articles because they're a little bit above my level of understanding, but I'll scan the topics. And then there's also podcasts that are out there. One of them actually is published by our Rocky Mountain local section in Colorado, and it's called Probability Matters. So here's a little soft plug for that podcast. They feature a variety of IH topics each and every week. And I would highly recommend that if you want to tune into a podcast that's specifically focused on industrial hygiene, you check out something called Probability Matters. And then, obviously, there's the newsletters that we get from the CDC and NIOSH and OSHA, and I keep up to date on all of that. And then, of course, I'm kind of in a catbird seat because I talk to a lot of really smart people. And so, as the head of AIHA, I have my fingertips on literally hundreds of subject matter experts. And so I routinely talk to what I call these luminaries, right? Folks that have been in the profession for decades. And I just feed off of them. And when I have conversations with these folks, I'm like a sponge. I just, really absorb, their perspectives on the issues of the day and sift through what I've learned. And I compare what I've learned and what my biases are compared to what they're telling me. And I also go to a lot of meetings. I speak at a lot of local section events, and I try to hang around and listen to the other speakers at these events. And so there's so many different venues in which I'm getting information. From the emotional intelligence side of thing and kind of the more business side of thing, there are other podcasts that I listen to. I've become an avid walker through the whole pandemic. I do 5 miles a day when it's not raining or snowing out. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm walking. And there's emotional intelligence podcasts. Of course, there's NPR podcasts. There's more technical podcasts that I listen to, including Probability Matters. And so I like to get a mix of both, reading, listening, video snippets, and just conversations with the members of AIHA.
Fantastic. Well, I guess as we wrap up here, interested to just get your closing thoughts. Any topics or points that we didn't cover that you'd like to, and anything you want to put out to the audience about where to find find out more about AIHA's kind of work, the documents that you reference. Where can they go to find those things?
Sure. So the association's website is aiha.org, and you can get to all of our guidance documents through aiha.org. There's another microsite called backtoworksafely.org, and that's where all of the 27 Back to Work Safely guidance documents are housed. And there's also all those other COVID documents that I referenced on that website. In terms of my parting words to the audience, one of the things, again, that we're very interested in doing is reinforcing importance of the profession, generating awareness within children at a very early age. And I think that, we've done a lot of great work in developing tools like our IH Heroes comic books that have been very well received. We have actually won awards as an association for these comic books. But I think that the more we can do to generate awareness in children before they start talking to their friends and family saying, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a nurse. They don't even know that occupational health is a thing. They're not even aware that we are a profession. And we have such a great value proposition. And so that's something we're really spending a lot of time on. And then I think that that really feeds into us as a very sustainable society for the profession. And on that note, one of the things that we're doing in 2021, which is really separate from COVID, because we've spent so much time in the last hour talking about COVID, but what is our role with climate change? We call it climate change adaptation. What's the role of the industrial hygienist with climate change adaptation? We all know that the climate is warming up. There's more natural disasters. There's wildfires. First responders are having to work harder, and they are obviously workers. And so we know that heat stress, for example, is one of the stressors that is facing workers. But what else? How do we play a role in the whole climate change adaptation discussion? And so I just think the future is extremely bright for the profession. And again, I'm very proud and honored to be running AIHA at this critical juncture. So I really appreciate your time and everybody listening in this afternoon.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Larry. We are tremendously grateful for your time, for your perspective, and for your leadership, and look forward to being in touch. Thank you so much again.
Thank you again.